you're not gonna see this often. I ain't down with the awkward looking PNG tubers, animation. I'm not good at it yet, and also it takes forever even if I was. But eventually I might try Scott Falco's toontuber thingy majiggy. Not as creepy as a VTuber. Who's Scott? Glad you asked. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm very disappointed. How dare you click on this video? So, the TLDR is Scott Falco is one of those YouTubers who started out as an animator making edgy parodies on YouTube. They weren't as edgy as I thought they were. He's definitely not an ego raptor, that's for sure. Realized it wasn't sustainable after a while, so he went through an angsty phase, and now he's in his I have no enemies, but I'm still a little depressed phase. In other words, he's just like me, for real, on God. I've lost touch with the youth. I don't even know what's going on with my own age group. I've been isolated so long. That's all you need to know. Okay, you're still here? Kind of cringe, bro. But we mustn't kill the cringe. We must kill the part that cringes.
My metamorphosis began inside my flesh. His unfolding chemistry is great, but my transition shall be agonizing.
Okay, done. I am now cringe-free instead of cringy. I got more bars from afar. Now the Zoomers may know of Scott the Waz, but this was my Scott. This was my awkward white teen nerd dude thing of my generation, okay guys? Now, let me tell you youngsters, opens book of a story. Well damn, it's really tough to describe the vibe, so let me try to be your scribe so you can subscribe to Alecations if you like animations. The early days of his work is not as high quality as when he had another 14 years worth of experience. I say this with much cadence, but it's pretty obvious that it's pretty superfluous to try to criticize something he surmised 14 years ago. This probably shocked you a great deal. If sarcasm could cause gasms, I'd somehow make you blow. But I think the more interesting part is the time capsule of a simpler time where being edgy was not a crime and awkward learning curves were allowed to shine. Though to be fair, don't be scared, this isn't that edgy to me. Looking at TikTok, YouTube shorts, it's a lot more terrifying, you see. For those who did not grow up when YouTube was starting to blow up, let me explain it to you. Like these videos just showed up. Some of the early aesthetics, visuals, and ideas weren't pathetic, just Tumblr-like rituals for a teen to grow as fast as she is. And pathetic, that's a stretch of a rhyme. Quite the crime. What I'm saying is that when he was young, it looked a bit like Tumblr, but even in the early days, he had more confidence than a mumbler, even when he was young, despite being a modern fumbler. As shown in Rare Candy, his art evolved to look quite dandy and handy with an appealing art style he left behind so eventually in favor of efficiency. The humor was just kind of a typical edgy Pokemon animation, so the writing wouldn't get a Pulitzer or any standing ovation, to be fair, and not to sound like a nerdy frickin' square. Nerd emoji. This wasn't as edgy as I remember, so maybe I shouldn't care. But in the very beginning, as his talents were quite winning, you could see the passion in The Legend of Zelda. And to this day it hasn't been shelved, But the art got more proportional, less big-ass faces getting distortional, and it generally looks more mature. He carried on and parried from, with his first big success, Dark Souls, not to be confused with Plague of Gripes' Dark Holes. This was the first I saw of his animation, seeing a generic night animation without any context, or anything to reflect. Parodies like a self-propelling machination. The comedy and timing was really getting quite nice, though I did miss the spice and the appeal of the dandy-looking candy. That was basically a one-time thing with that animation style with a fling. It really does make sense because that was something in the past tense, but still, it looked pretty believable. That style, it was cartoony yet realistic enough to make me smile. I'm making some of these up as I go along. This introduces a crossing of paths he alludes to later, as Scott is an animator, not just an illustrator, but one of the fundamentals is appeal, but the practicality of getting something done is way more real. Scott discusses simplified designs, and this isn't something he's never really resigned. Though in this traditional period, we saw a bit of a loss of the appeal in favor of simplicity, when later that plus efficiency will be combined in the Holy Trinity. and even if there are slight deficiencies, it isn't on the level of a dark god like Yawgmoth or Yogg-Sothoth. Though discussing Dark Souls general, I see a bit more of his snarky humor grow like a tumor. Tumor and humor, seriously, are those the only good things that rhyme? Okay, I'm looking at the other options. No, those are the best. Oh my god. So I suppose he does deprecate as his subs elevate, but we shall get there when we actually see some fluffy chibi hair. Jokes dry and sardonic kind of became fly and iconic with Scott. But for his first biggest boost, he entered the 3 million roost, and we're flying higher like Shane Dawson's cat in an air fryer. That's all I had? Okay, I'm done with the rhymes. Good God. Okay, I might have bars from afar, but conveying the abstract evolution of someone isn't exactly easy peasy lemon squeezy doing that the whole episode, if you get me and you get my mode. I think one thing to note with this Dark Souls video is due to the better backgrounds and masking of the facial expressions, it looked a lot more professional than some of his other work around that time. You could kind of see this as an experimental phase in the early days of going for wacky stuff, trying to make characters look appealing or not too awkward, sometimes embracing the awkwardness for comedy, looking less stilted and wilted, all that good shit. Oh no, I'm rhyming again. I think the writing was also experimental, though as I mentioned he did start to stick with the more sarcastic humor. He was also one of the few animators to make an animation parody of Minecraft that wasn't the most viewed on his channel. Around the Dark Souls phase of his animation was looking pretty appealing, and you could tell he was doing a bit of it more for love with the action scenes, and he wasn't really caring as much about the buck. But then he did more animation parodies, and speaking of original content, here's an unfortunate rule that the has-beens of hell of a boss might not know online. Original content usually does badly. So you have to be derivative to a certain extent just to be successful. Why? It seems so cynical. If you pull something from your ass, you need to touch grass if you think someone will look up that thing you just made up. There was an original animation phase with some skits. Most of them, I didn't really remember too much. I won't talk about most of them here. They kind of just existed as their own thing, as like a slightly relatable animation. Looking through his channel, Scott didn't like switch up the topic every time like a lot of people did. He usually went through phases of like either a bunch of Zelda videos, bunch of original content, bunch of Mega Man videos, bunch of original content, which contrasts against the more trend-hoppy animation gamers at the time. And by that I mean just anyone who was an animator from Newgrounds who's found success on early YouTube. But there was one series that always stood out. I was scrolling through his content and was slammed with a repressed memory after seeing this shit. But I'm old, according to sperms on TikTok, so my 22-year-old ass must have dementia. So, that show's gonna be first episode. It's okay. It's kind of a cringy anime horny bait video, and the music drowns out the audio. I need to make sure I'm not being a hypocrite right now. Okay, are the audio levels good? Okay, that's pretty sexalicious and nutritious. They looking thigh high up to the sky. Okay, those levels are good. Anyways, glad I've never made that mistake before. But at least the payoff of the joke was subversive, so that made it at least funnier. But I don't think there's much to talk about in the writing or comedy department in this first episode, but good opportunity as any to talk about Scott's designs and his general approach to designs. Sig and Tessa both look really good, complementary colors within the design, but also with each other. I like the 2 to 3 color system. There's good contrast, but there's also good balance. Tessa has brownish red hair, yellow accents on both the hair and in the middle of her corset, I think. Red boots, so you just see the colors kind of spread out through the design. And not too many colors, just very simple, but still a unique shape. I mean, it's not the most unique, but at least it has enough differences. I like the sleeplessness combined with the wide hair, midriff thing being compressed in the middle with a yellow thingamajiggy, big neck, Banana Republic's woman's Adeline mock neck tank ivory size M. I knew that. Yeah. Anyways, the angles and directions kinda all pointing up until it reaches their big ass faces, where the shots are focused on anyway, so it's cool seeing the designs themselves help direct the audience's attention with almost literal arrows, but still subtle enough. While Tessa is kinda the focus in a lot of scenes, Sig's design helps point towards what he's paying attention to. Food, market dude, Tessa. Because usually what he's looking at is the focus of a scene. The blue, black, and gray, also the fluffy animated hair. Meanwhile, Tessa, she's a bit more self-absorbed. It's kind of pointing towards her. Interesting little note. Maybe not self-absorbed, I don't really know yet. It's self-focused in this episode at least. The design of the characters are the best part in my opinion. Hair having repetitive colors with the rest of the design, like the weird yoky fuckles and the tassels hair.
This is your brain on.
But Sig's gray hair and jacket, like, mwah, good stuff. Also, Tessa's hair looks like a creature, which is cool. Cools versus warms as well. Unlike Scott, I've never actually studied anything artistic. I got all my artistic instinct from Lego and Bionicle color schemes. Second episode, big step up. In the episode Order Up, the humor and stylization got an upgrade. There's actually good character interaction instead of it just being weird anime tropes. Eyes got the appropriate amount of detail along with proportions. More of the jokes, more variety, a lot more stuff happening. Cuts added to the timing of said comedy. Style was starting to look more appropriate for cartoony antics, while still having designs appealing and lengthy enough for decent action, and the anime established some light chemistry that, in spite of the bickering and crashing personalities, they care about each other. So, that's a solid one. Party Foul, last real episode, and the only one I actually remember. Mostly because, unlike a lot of animation in 2014, it was really focused on characterization more than comedy, which felt pretty unique for the time.
Place is like 99% dudes anyway, so that makes you the prettiest girl in the room.
Thanks. That's actually really...
Of course, it also means you're the ugliest girl here.
Thanks, Sig.
The Rizzler over here. Zoomers, please laugh. I reference a Zoomer meme. Please, I'm begging you. I don't know what the fuck you guys are even saying. Why did you replace the word game with Riz whatever? Animation got even more expressive with the squash and stretch, not looking as far-fetched. I mean, the models still don't look consistent, but I'm not one to talk. The action and chase was brief but ambitious, but really the character interaction all episode pretty entertaining. Seeing the goof play off someone overly serious, and yeah, she's cranky, but they like each other, we know. Sadly, this was the penultimate Sig and Tessa, with the next episode being essentially an intro. This is the fate of a lot of animators' pet projects. You love them more than your but your unfortunately outlives them. And sadly, you can't put down your just Rufus. That was way too fucking dark. Oh my god. This might as well be the eulogy on a tombstone when a creator says a show isn't dead. That means it's so dead. At least for now. Maybe they'll return. Hopefully they will. 7 years ago. I'm hoping. And speaking of paying the bills, the next upload is important for the Scott lore. Side of Salt, Overwatch. Overwatch used to be hailed as the TF2 killer, and like everything from 2016, that didn't age very well. Scott series did, however. I don't really want to analyze every episode on their own, just the impact on Scott and the platform. 2016, probably the most chaotic time ever on YouTube. Annoying changes every year. But 2016 had a burst of political and drama content. YouTube was also trying to target spam-like content, and thus we're starting to reward people for longer content. This hurt the animators, and though the censorship of edgy content also hurt reviewers, and a lot of them become more sincere and less fun in subsequent years because if they can't say fuck, they don't know how to make a joke. It's just how it goes, guys. It gave talented animators at least some opportunity to capitalize while still animating, or at least some of them. A lot of them died out, and I've discussed in the past that it kind of forced their hands to actually make their dream job animation a reality because you can't just upload little shorts anymore, guys. I mean, some managed to make it work, but not all of them. They all adapted differently, but Scott Falco started the Side of Salt series, which analyzed a different Overwatch character every episode with snarky jokes and more refined but less animated designs. So, you got the visual appeal of animation combined with the long-form analysis content. Even though they mostly started as 5 or so minutes long, they got longer as time went on. So the splitting of resources did allow Scott to make the designs as consistent and distinct as possible while chipifying anyone he talked about. He spread the Side of Salt series to, well, other series. However, has gone on record saying that he was too negative and harsh in the past.
I wound up watching my first Salt on the chapter again after I 100% called the ending, and man, I don't like my old content. I bitched about text. I bitched about there being a lot of dialogue on a game that prides itself on its dialogue.
I can see him seeing this as a bit of a dark age for his content. A lot of people were already cynical for a multitude of reasons, and though they changed their content to less original and creative in favor of longer and analytical content, the transition was a bit more fumbly. I mean, a lot of people were understandably upset with what was all the drastic changes and getting the rug pulled under from them during that tumultuous time on YouTube. Think the current housing market, where I'm literally seeing articles of people favoring the more affordable option of flying a fucking plane to their college than renting. So think of it that way, except we're terminally online losers like us, you know. Basically the same thing. This content managed to basically maintain the animation, appeal, and visuals while also hopping on the more analytical trends, just reviewing stuff, talking about something trendy. And he wasn't the first to do this, but he probably helped popularize it. Seeing a panda kind of be almost the same thing at that point. Like, really? Anyone think about it? And yeah, Jaltide predated them both, synthesizing art with analysis. But back to Scott specifically, with the Overwatch series, it was getting real. His quitting of Overwatch wasn't the most pretty. He was getting very, very burned out and somewhat resentful of the Overwatch community and game being annoying, which, yeah, okay, I get it. And eventually he formally quit.
So, you used to love Overwatch, but now it seems like you're just ignoring it. And whenever someone asks you about it, you get angry. What's going on?
Are you serious? This is just old and boring. Like, yeah, sure, Overwatch used to be really fun, but I mean, like, nothing's changed. It's just the same thing day in and day out. Not to mention having the Overwatch namesake tied to me. It's all anyone ever wants to talk about. I have other interests, you know. Plus, have you ever talked to any of the fans?
Well, yeah, but all of us are still having a lot of fun with Overwatch.
And that's fine.
It isn't subtle. He respects people's opinions who disagree with him, but this is just a good example of how sometimes that YouTube grind becomes as miserable as a real job without the consistency or payout. Despite these not having as much animation as their older content, it actually kind of showed some of the insight into why and how Scott developed in the way he did.
The designs started okay, but they seem to be getting more and more overly complex. Like, what is this? They started with a theme and then decided more detail. More detail is good. I kind of hate doing animated bits for Overwatch salts because it's just so obnoxious drawing the characters.
I already alluded to how you can kind of see the evolution sort of branch out with Scott's content. Usually when artists improve, it's pretty linear. But hey, you can definitely see Scott kind of branch out in a lot of ways. Their early stuff, yeah, looks awkward. You see him trying to find his footing, either go full cartoony, full realistic, or somewhere in the middle. And I think he's landed on a pretty good style at this point. But yeah, it definitely does favor more simplistic designs instead of the convoluted stuff going on with the Overwatch heroes, for sure. Also, not just better, but more refined in general. So despite the Overwatch with a Side of Salt series being annoying for him by the end, I do think it at least helped him refine and focus his artistic vision. I've been writing all day and I haven't eaten. Get a real job, kids. But the content, it's gotten a lot more chill. And I don't mean just in terms of negativity per se. It's gotten more low-key and less explosive over the years for sure, but I've also seen him integrate little OCs here and there to keep his creative juices flowing, guys. And also to sell marketable plushies that will not get him sued by copyright holders. which is the most important part, obviously. He's also further innovating things for people very explicitly with his event called Toontubers, which is basically just, you know, PNG tubers, and how it's really awkward seeing, I don't know, some furry teenager just run through like 5 different poses for everything they say, and it's just, you feel really awkward as they jitter between expressions, or you feel even more uncomfortable with a VTuber with the CGI anime girls staring into your soul, and they're gonna eat your soul too. Hey, Toontubers, they actually look like they're easier to animate and don't look terrifying. I mean, that alone deserves a follow on Scott's Twitter, and that's the wrong Twitter. I'm never looking at the Spider-Man clone saga the same way ever again. Okay, anyways, it's all good. Scott, he feels like he's a pretty real dude. And like many creatives out there, it just feels a little sad because, you know, they want to make stuff. They want to make their stuff, but it's never that easy. Even when you do get to make what you want, or you want to make what you do, the process can feel like ass. And of course, the loneliness. He's getting a slight reprieve, and he seems a lot happier than he used to be. Maybe finding a more stable career, maybe finding a more stable life, maybe just his mental state. I don't know if he's doing good or doing bad. I just know that he's just a humble guy who you can learn a lot from, and I think he's pretty important for any aspiring artist. Compilation of this last video that's really artsy fartsy. And also, if you like animation, don't just sub to him, sub to Alecations.
We're so back, we're so back, we're so back.